Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's live discussion on House of the Dragon, Season 1, Episode 4. Um, God, what's this called again? King of the Narrow Sea, I believe is the name of this episode. Anyway, unfortunately, Darren was not able to join tonight. I was feeling a bit under the weather, but I'm joined here with Alyssa. Alyssa, thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, good to be here. Good to talk about another episode of House of the Dragon.
Cool. So, well, let's just start with you. What do you think of this episode tonight? Yeah, what were some of your overall thoughts?
Um, it's an episode that I think grew on me a little bit with reflection. My initial reaction was honestly, I felt a little bored. I felt it was a little slow moving. I was not all that interested in the whole storyline that took up a bunch of the episode of Rhaenyra sneaking out as one of the peasants and watching a play, which we've seen Arya do before. Nothing new. And honestly, in Game of Thrones at this point, seeing a bunch of people in the background having sex is just like, I mean, ho hum. It's and I'm not really shocked by the incest in this world anymore. I'm surprised that people still are. Maybe those people haven't read the books because if you've read Fire and Blood, for sure, like there's incest all over the place in that book. And I'm not saying I approve of it or it's a good thing. I'm just saying that it's something that I expect and have grown accustomed to in this particular world. It's very much part of this world, especially with the Targaryens, who
Yes.
are very much known for that. So I'm not shocked by that. I just kind of felt like, oh, they're trying to shock me. But you know, kind of reflecting on it and what this episode was doing and the character development it had for Rhaenyra and how she is trying to find herself, trying to find a balance between her duty, which is something her mom talked a lot about when in the first episode, giving birth is your battlefield, trying to find the balance between her duty and then her pleasure and trying to figure that out. And then also like learning more and more about the double standard that exists in the world where
Mm.
men, if they could go out and have all the bastard sons they want, but woman gets knocked out, you get knocked up, you got to get the abortion tea. So it's not, there's a huge double standard in her dealing with that and trying to reconcile that and still trying to decide how much of her duty she wants to commit to. Um, when I think about the dynamics there and the greater themes of the episode, I actually do find it interesting. And also, can't I can't say anything wrong about the scene of Otto finally getting ousted as Hand of the King, and Viserys finally calling him out for his shit. I dare say, even based on the trailer for next week, not to spoil too much from the trailer if you're not into that, that we probably haven't seen the last of Sir Otto Hightower. However, even with that being the case, I still found that scene pretty satisfying. So overall, yeah, as I reflected on this, I did end up liking this episode. It didn't have the big battle scenes of last week, but I still ended up kind of liking the themes that it explored.
Yeah, I feel kind of similarly. Like when I was first watching the episode, I'm like, well, this is kind of boring. It's kind of, I think it's probably the slowest episode that they had yet, but it grew on me, and particularly with the end. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, this is kind of the intrigue, the character stories that I love most about the show. I mean, who doesn't love a great battle scenes? And the ones we got last week are great. But I also like what I really love about Game of Thrones and then this show as well was the political intrigue and the character stories. And I thought those were both extremely strong in this episode, particularly. And also, and I know we disagreed about this last week, but I preferred the portrayal of Rhaenyra in this episode. To me, it's not so much about seeing her as a protagonist or as a hero because I think she's clearly a shade of gray and she does do a lot of stuff. Even in this episode, I completely disagree with, but she felt more well rounded to me, more like a dynamic character rather than last week. She felt like a angsty teenager cliche a little bit for me. Whereas this week, I really understood like where she was coming from, and I think this episode did a much better job of fleshing out her character. And also Damon, like I like really like how this episode handled Damon and the whole dynamic. And I agree. Why are people still shocked by incest in Game of Thrones or the Game of Thrones universe? Like, I mean that's something that's is kind of like, oh yeah, I'm like, I even felt that way. Everyone's making a huge deal about John and Danny. It's like, oh my god, and I was like, aren't you like used to that yet? After watching this show for 8 seasons, but anyway,
at
but
least used to it. I'm sorry. At least used to it
go.
within this universe. I mean, you don't have to be used to it in real life, but
Well,
I mean,
of course, yeah.
in this
but
universe,
show,
you should
yes,
come to
absolutely.
expect it. Yeah.
Yes, in the show, yes. But yeah, so I wasn't. I mean, it still has like a little bit of shock value to it, but and even though it is somewhat commonplace with Targaryens, you still get that there's a little bit of stigma attached to it, even in this universe, particularly when you go outside the Targaryen family. So there was some shock value, but I didn't think it was like outrageous or anything. So overall, I did really like this episode. It was definitely a slower pace than the previous ones, but then it started with a huge time jump, which we'll get into. And I've heard apparently there's some people complaining about the pace that's the show is taking all these time jumps. Maybe it's because I know the overall story, but I'm not complaining at all because I think it's necessary to get to where we need to go.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely is.
All right, cool. So let's go ahead and jump into the episode. Let's start with the opening scene where Rhaenyra, I believe she's at Storm's End. I didn't know this, but a lot of videos I watched pointed out that she was at Storm's End.
Well, the guy she was sitting next to was a Baratheon. He was the same Baratheon who was in the tournament in episode 1. So I think Storm's End that's the conclusion I came to. So I think that's a pretty good guess.
Well, and other people have pointed out that the set looked like very similar to how it was described in the books, like whatever round bulb or whatever. But anyway, she was there with a huge line of men, potential suitors, all singing up to wanting to marry her, and this is really interesting because her reaction. I've heard different reactions to this because I thought that her reaction was kind of understandable because she had all these men being like droning on about this. My house is all strong and blah blah, and droning on about this shit, and I could see how that would be nerve wracking. She would be like, "Well, you're just too old. Get the fuck out of here." Like, and then like the Baratheon dude apparently thought she was being too rude and wasn't being respectful of his stature, and other people thought she wasn't really taking it seriously. But I mean, she does have some agency because her father said, you can choose rather than forcing, which does eventually happen, but we'll get to that later. And so she at least has agency but she's forced to like meet with all these men who. And as she explains to Alicent later, they're not fawning over her. They just want her prestige. They want the power that comes with it, so they don't really care about her. And so I can see how she could find that a little bit insulting. But the one thing I wanted to say about this scene is because it's funny. Last week, you and I and Darren did a discussion on She-Hulk and how they had like a montage of her doing the online dating. Meeting all these potential like douchebags that she met online, and I think that this scene was like the medieval version of that, where instead of online dating, is all these people coming up, gathering up in a line in the hall, and like all these douchebags coming up. Although that young kid wasn't too bad; he was just way too young. But then he was getting heckled by some douchebag.
Yeah, and I like it better here because it moves the story forward. Whereas in She-Hulk, I didn't think it was really necessary. I think it was
Yes.
yeah, thrown in there. Whereas we left off last week with her, getting to choose her suitor. So to have this scene be the opening scene makes a lot of sense to me.
So Brandon in the chat said, did that poor kid who offered for her hand in the marriage get killed? No, he in fact killed the other dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. Apparently, like, the two houses are feuding, and the guy was like, just being an asshole to him. It was like, oh, she has a dragon, you dumb cunt, or whatever. And then,
yeah, so those are the Brackens and the Blackwoods. The Blackwoods being the little kid, and the Bracken being the other one. Saw a couple videos, people mistaking that guy for a Baratheon because his sigil kind of does look like a stag, but it's actually a horse. And they actually, if you listen carefully, they do call him out as a Bracken. I only know this because I watched some other video where they amplified the audio. I didn't catch it. But a little bit of the history is the Blackwoods take credit for helping Aegon destroy Harrenhal. Like they gave him the heads up or something about Harrenhal. But really, the dragon did most of the work destroying Harrenhal, and I think that's what the Bracken was pointing out. Oh yeah, you Blackwoods really made that happen. Like that they didn't really do much. It was really the dragon doing most of the work. So it was, and yes, Brandon, it's the Blackwood and the Bracken. So yeah, they just have this long-standing feud, and I love that the kid came out on top. I love that he ended up being the winner of that little.
Yeah, I heard someone say like, "Oh, I hope we see this kid again." I seriously doubt it. I don't think.
Why? No, we don't need to see this kid again. Maybe it's sort of a throwaway background character.
Yes, maybe. Yeah, it'll be like at a big royal gathering and be like, "You remember me, princess?" or something like that. But yeah, I got that from watching this. Like, I didn't think it was a Baratheon. I got it that there were two houses that were feuding, but I didn't know the backstory behind it. But anyway, did you have any other thoughts on this whole Rhaenyra's reaction to?
No, I agree with you that I think she had a really appropriate reaction. I loved when the first dude was like, "Oh, you remind me of your great grandmother," and she's like, "So, what does my great grandmother look like?"
Oh yeah, that was Dundarian. Dude,
yeah, it was a Dundarian. Yeah. So that was funny. Yeah, no, I agree with you on that.
All right, so let's talk about apparently there was a 4-year time jump. Now, if I remember correctly, she was said to be 17 in last week's episode, right?
Oh no, there's a 1-year time jump from last week's episode, a 4 year from 2 episodes ago.
Okay, all right, so it's only a 1-year time jump.
Yeah, there's at one point somebody says to her, I forget who says, "Oh, that was 3 years ago." Also, and it's referring to something that happened, or no, they say that was 4 years ago, referring to something that happened in episode 2. And if you listen carefully, and again, this was pointed out to me in another video, the mummers doing the play refer to Aegon as 3 years old. So, and last week was 2 years old. Okay. So it's a 4-year time jump from episode 2. Okay. It's a 1-year time jump from last week.
All right, well, that makes a little bit of sense. So she'd be around 18.
18 now, yeah.
Okay. Because I know that coming up from promotional material and stuff that they are going to have a different actress playing the adult version of her, and I'm wondering when they're going to make that jump. And it seems like it's going to be kind of like having Obi-Wan Kenobi. Was an Obi-Wan Kenobi show that's taking place, I think, was it 10 years after the prequels and not that long before, and so it's going to jump from Ewan McGregor to freaking Alec Guinness in like 8 years or something. So it's kind of, or like the X-Men where Michael Fassbender looks exactly the same from the 60s and 90s, and then 8 years later becomes Ian McGregor. So I'm kind of thinking that this might be a little like this, unless they do like a 10-year time jump or something. Because she looks exactly the same as like when she was 12 to when she's 18.
So, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't look like they're doing a huge time jump next week because in the trailer, it sounds like that Viserys is still announcing the marriage between her and Laenor, so it can't be that much of a time jump next week. But
Yeah.
after that, they could do maybe one more small time jump, and then episode 7 is the huge time jump, and we get the new actresses, or they could do a humongous time jump between 5 and 6. I don't know. And they may well do like a 10-year time jump at some point.
A lot of people are guessing it's going to be between episodes 5 and 6.
That would make the most sense, like split the season equally in half, but
yeah,
doesn't necessarily have to be that, so we'll see. Yeah, Brandon said, I thought only one because Allison was pregnant with Helena. Well, she actually has already given birth to Helena. She was pregnant with Helena last week, and you see her nursing. She's not called out as Helena on the show, but if they're following the books, then Helena is the second born child, and I'm assuming they will name drop her at some point. So assuming that is Helena, then yeah, there's a scene of her like nursing a crying Helena, and last week she was pregnant with her. So at some point between the 2 episodes, she gave birth to who I presume is Helena.
So yeah, that learning it was just 1 year makes me think differently of the scene where Daemon returns, because then it's only because I thought it was like 4 years since they took over the stepstones, but just 1 year. But that's interesting. And he returns, and he seems to be a changed man. But we find in this episode, of course, he's not. he's just the same old Daemon. He's basically, but he wanted to make a very public show of "I bow to you, my king," whatever. Which to me, I was like, this seems like wrong because last week he beat the shit out of a messenger just because the king was offering help. But then we do see that he's this is all part of a plan, part of an act or a way to get back at him.
Yeah. Yeah, Viserys is like Charlie Brown of Lucy holding the football. He just keeps on falling for it. Although I don't think he's going to fall for it again. I think that he's done falling for it, but he just keeps on, oh, my brother. And I think Daemon knows that and is intentionally manipulating him and knows how to manipulate him.
Oh, yeah. And Brandon Chat mentions cutting his hair. Well, that wasn't the only change, like his only real change. But in that scene where he first shows up, he was acting all like, "Oh, all princely."
Yeah,
that's all just an act. But yeah, I think cutting his hair was part of the deceit as well. Like he's like, "Look, I'm so clean cut."
Yeah, I'm clean cut now. Yeah.
And how they were like reminiscing at the party and being like old friends, and Allison's like, "Oh, maybe you should go look at the tapestries," and he's just laughed in her face. I think that scene also kind of portrayed the kind of uneasy or relationship that Viserys has with Alicent, and how it seems like the relationship kind of went downhill since they got married, that they don't really have that connection anymore.
Yeah. Well, we can talk more about this at the end of the episode, but I'm really curious to see how the relationship is going to go downhill next week, because I have a feeling there are reasons for it to go downhill even more, which we'll get into later. But yeah, so I'm interested to see how this relationship continues to plummet.
Now, so let's talk about what I have in my notes as Daemon's and Narina's excellent adventure. Or some people I've seen a lot of videos comparing this to Aladdin. And it's this does seem like something very common. Like
I heard it is the X-rated version of Aladdin.
Yeah, the X-rated version of Aladdin. Yes. But it does seem like a trope we've seen in a lot of movies where the royals go dress up as common folk and they go out and have a party and go and experience all this stuff. Because their royal regal life that everyone is so envious of is actually really dull and boring, so that they go amongst the common folk to have fun. One thing I want to touch on specifically I thought was really interesting was the puppet show making it very clear of what they thought of her, and they thought of her as weak, and that there's no way a woman should become the ruler of Westeros, and um, a lot of people compared this to the play in Bravos, and I did think of that as well. But the
I
scene.
did it. Yeah, I did at the top of this video. I also,
Oh,
I also made that
right,
comparison.
right.
But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but I thought of that as well. But the scene that reminded me most of is in season 2 when Bronn and Tyrion left King's Landing, and they were kind of cloaked themselves so they wouldn't be recognized, and they heard people talking about like they were talking shit about Joffrey, and Tyrion was like laughing, but then they started calling him like the was something demon or whatever, and he's like, what? Started to realize that they had this shit about him as well. But yeah, and then also the play of Bravos, because it really shows how the common perception of the royals is like really, really off. Because in this case, like Viserys is actually the weak one. He's actually the weak-willed, and I think they made it like clear that Rhaenyra would actually be a much more sort of willful and strong ruler, but this, of course, is colored by the patriarchy and gender stereotypes and whatnot. And so I thought, I mean, this is something the show has touched on a lot, but I thought that hit home like hardest here, especially her realizing this, and she was like very dismissive at first. She was like, "Well, who the fuck cares about what these common folk think?" And Damon's like, "Well, you need to care if you're gonna have to rule them," and that's actually a wise bit of advice. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that whole thing.
No, I don't know. Like, yeah, I mean, like I said at the top, I kind of thought at first, like, yeah, it's just the Bravos thing again, blah blah blah. We've already seen this, but as kind of I reflected on it, yeah, you're right. It is, it's another key character moment for Rhaenyra, as she is kind of having her eyes open to what the common people think, and that it does actually matter. And this is something that seems to be old hat to Damon. He seems to be very much aware of this. I don't know if they called him this in the show or not. In the book, he's referred to sometimes as I think the Lord or the Prince of Flea Bottom, and I can't remember if the show has ever used that term. But he's he is. It's implied that he has a little bit more of a connection to the small folk. He does go to brothels a lot. He's out there in the streets with them. So this is not news to him, but he is, like you said, it's kind of wise, like opening Rhaenyra's eyes to this.
Yeah, it's kind of. I saw this scene as kind of like he was her guide and showing it. And this, I kind of glossed over the whole thing, how it happened, about how there was a secret doorway in her room that instead of like her, him like being really overly pushy about her, saying like, meet me at this time at this hour, she's like just gave her a map of the passageway. I heard someone complaining about that, saying, "Oh, isn't that ridiculous? She lived in that room her whole life and didn't know there's a secret passageway." But if you know the histories, there was I can't remember, some king who was like,
it was Maegor the Cruel. It was Maegor.
Yes. And
He
so it makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah, so he built all those passages, or he had those passages built, and then all the people who built the passages for him, he wined and dined them, and then murdered them all, so that he would be the only one who knows where the passages are. So, it would make sense that she wouldn't know about them.
Yeah. I mean, I guess Damon was kind of like probably figured out why.
Yeah.
Or whatever, but
he's been around longer. He's been around causing mischief longer. Yeah,
but that's definitely what I got out of this scene. And I mean, I guess that's why people compare it to Aladdin, because Aladdin was more wise as the way of the common folk, whereas it seems like Damon was, and he was sort of showing her what it's like.
Yeah.
But all right, so let's get to the whole brothel orgy scene now. This, I wasn't sure exactly what was going on until to be honest, till I watched the behind the scenes stuff and some videos that explained that, because he started making out with her and they were close, and then he like backed away, and I was kind of confused about it, but they explained in the behind the scenes stuff that he thought he was going to shock her by doing that and be in control and kind of manipulate her, but she was kind of taking control and taking agency, and he didn't. That surprised him. He didn't like that, and so he just fucked off. Which does show like this whole thing to be a calculated manipulation on his part that kind of went wrong, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah, what do you think exactly his calculated manipulation was? Like, what was he trying to get out of this? Was he trying to? I don't know. Like, because later he asked Viserys for her hand in marriage. Was he trying to get her to fall for him? But I don't know. What was he trying to do? I don't know if I quite get that.
I think his ultimate goal was to marry her, but I think he wanted to come off as someone who was like in control of her. I think he wanted to sort of assert control over her.
Okay.
And be like, if so, when he proposed marriage, she would feel obliged to do it because but that plan completely backfired.
If that's the case, he completely misread his niece, and how she's not as weak-willed as he apparently thought she was.
But I could buy that he would, since he hadn't seen her much in the past coming years, and what he knew of her mostly is from when she was younger.
Yeah.
And Brandon says that Alt Shift X says Damon was too drunk to perform. I think it's beyond that, though. Like, I think in the behind the scenes thing, they mentioned that they actually called back to a previous episode where he couldn't perform, and it had more to because what's her face was being more assertive, and that's what kind of yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that could be part of it. He couldn't perform because she was being too assertive.
Yeah, I mean, being drunk certainly wouldn't help.
Yeah.
But he didn't come off as particularly drunk to me. I don't know. It seemed like he was just trying to be more in control.
Yeah.
Let's see. So Brittenberg says the puppet show is interesting. The vote at the Great Council of Harrenhal was overwhelmingly for Viserys. The more democratic the process of choosing ruler, the harder it is for a woman to win. Indeed.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go ahead and talk about Sir Kristen Cole.
Wait, can I throw in something real quick before we jump to that? So there's just kind of this throwaway scene. I think it's before they go to the brothel, where she runs into this dude on the street. I am tracking that guy because I'm wondering so that is Lord Howland Strong, nickname Breakbones Strong.
Oh, that's who that was.
Right? Yeah, and he apparently, I heard another review say he was last week. He was in the episode when she brought back the boar. He was like, "Oh, good," but I didn't catch it. But I caught him here, and he's the eldest son of what the hell is his first name? Lord Strong, the guy on the small council.
Yeah.
Brandon will tell me his first name. He's the eldest son, and the second son we saw last week. That's Larys Clubfoot Strong, the guy who like limped into the women's circle there. And so I'm wondering if these guys are gonna come back, because both of them do play a role in the books, but as we know, Game of Thrones likes to consolidate characters. So the first show did anyway. So they could just like, oh, here's Howland Strong for you book readers, just as a little shout out. But then he's not going to do anything else, and they'll give his story to somebody else. But I'm keeping my eye on him, see if he comes back or not.
Yeah, I also know the role he played, and I kind of assumed that the show would do that. But
yeah.
Perhaps they won't, but I think the fact that they keep showing him again makes me even think even more.
Yeah, Lionel, that's it. Thank you, Brandon. Lionel Strong. Anyway, I just want to throw that in there. We can move on.
But let me ask about that scene, because I was a bit confused. Did he think it was a boy and then recognize it was the princess, but then she said don't, so he pretended not to see her? Is that what happened?
I think so. Yeah. It seemed like at first he was like, oh boy. And then he was like, oh, you're the princess. And then he was like, whatever.
Yeah,
So
she said something like "don't," and then he was like, just like shoot her away or something.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't
yeah.
know.
I think that's what happened.
So yeah, so she so I think it's clear that her sort of encounter in the brothel and her encounter with Damon, I think that actually made her more assertive, especially because what Damon was trying to instill in her is like, look, you're gonna have to marry, of course, but that doesn't mean you can't fuck whoever you want. And he was, of course, leading by example in that regard. And so I think she kind of put that idea in his head and got her sort of excited, and so she made her move on Kristen Cole, which is something I imagine she was thinking about doing for a long time. Um, and he reciprocated, which I heard one video I watched said that this was a change from the books, but I didn't think it was, because I thought there were several, because the books, there's several different accounts and nobody knows exactly what happened. I thought like one of the accounts said this happened and another account said it didn't, if I remember.
Um, I remember that he rejected her. Or I think the way that the book presents it, if I recall, the Maester writing it, that the most credible account was that he rejected her. So I think that's the one we're supposed to go with. But there were, if you're right, I don't remember exactly, but if you're right, there was another account, probably Mushroom, saying that
Yeah,
that it did happen. Then it might have. Um,
yeah,
but
because
I
I was,
think the one we were led to believe happened was that he said, no, I can't do this.
see, I haven't read Fire and Blood. I just read that little snippet of World
Oh,
of Ice and Fire, and in that, it seemed like the narrator of World of Ice and Fire seemed to be like, well, some accounts say this and some accounts say that, and there's no way to
yeah. It
know.
might have been that way in the Fire and Blood too. I don't remember. But I remember coming away from it thinking that he rejected her. So I don't
Mm,
remember exactly. Um Another slight change is in Fire and Blood, Damon takes her to the brothel to like basically train her for Kristen Cole. Like you should go after Kristen Cole, and
oh,
it was very specifically targeted. Whereas here it's just like here's a brothel, and then she used that it was her choice to go after Kristen Cole,
mm,
which I like better. I like that the show
yes.
kind of made that alteration.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think that works better for this show. I also like Damon's motivation because his thing was like he wanted to marry her, so it wasn't
Yeah,
about Kristen Cole, but she kind of took that energy,
yeah.
and took it out on him. But I do have a feeling that they are leading to the same storyline with Kristen Cole as what happened in the books.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I heard a couple of perspectives that this is, this is kind of in a way sexual harassment because she's his boss, and it's difficult for him to say no. I mean, she doesn't like directly like quid quo pro him, like if you don't do this then this will happen or whatever, but I think that can be implied, like this is the
Mhm.
princess, and she may not think kindly of me anymore and may get me kicked off the Kingsguard or something if I don't go along with this. So in a way that is kind of borderline sexual harassment, with Rhaenyra being the harasser in this case because she's in the position of power, which is an interesting way to look at it. I hadn't thought of it that way, but
I think there's definitely that element, regardless. But I also believe the way they filmed it kind of heavily implied that Kristen Cole was completely consenting.
yeah,
The way he like slowly taked off his armor and all that shit.
yeah,
But there's still that. But that is actually correct. There's still that power dynamic to it.
yeah,
Yeah, that's also really interesting to think about. Um, all right, so then we'll cut over to Mr. Otto Hightower and his gossip. Now, what they call her? They said the white, was it the white spider or the
the
white
White Worm.
Worm, that's it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking Spider because of Varys, because she's acting like Varys in this, having like all these kids spy on people. So I didn't. Yeah, it took me a while to catch that. Those are her spies that reported to Otto Hightower. So what's
Yeah.
her motivation in this?
Good question. Is she trying to get Damon in trouble because she's not on the up and up with Damon anymore? Is she? Yeah, I don't know. I think that's something to pay attention to, but I don't really know
Or
what her motivation is.
maybe she knew exactly what would happen and was trying to get rid of Otto Hightower because he's a threat to Damon.
Yeah, I mean that seems like three-dimensional chess. I don't know if she's like that good at the game, but maybe it could be. It could be.
I get the impression they're kind of playing her off as the new Varys.
Yeah. I mean that very well could be that she could have been trying to get Otto Hightower ousted.
Because that is interesting that Viserys' reaction to it, because it didn't go the way Otto Hightower thought, and he was trying to be all humble. It's like, "Oh, my king, I'm just telling you what I know." And it's like, and Viserys is like, pissed off, and it's like, you're just doing your own ambitions, and and then we also see that Alicent was listening in, eavesdropping on this, and so she confronts Renee. Sorry, I was saying her name right all night. What was it? Rhaenyra.
Yeah.
So she confronts Rhaenyra, and Rhaenyra kind of. I mean, she doesn't lie. She just admits, some.
She did lie though, because she said that he didn't touch me, which is a lie. She should have said we didn't have sex, and that would have been the truth. But saying he didn't touch me is actually a lie, because he definitely touched her.
Yes,
but it isn't true that they had sex.
And did she omit the brothel, or said that they went there just to watch other people and then left?
I think that's what happened. Yeah, I think she
Yeah.
admitted to going there, but nothing happened between the two of them.
And I think but I think later when she tells her father, doesn't she just flat out say we didn't have sex? So
yeah,
lying.
Yeah.
But admits the fact that she did have sex with Kristen Cole when she got back, but that didn't have anything to do with anything. But so she was lying to Alicent, and it's just like, and some people were saying that she, that this is portraying her as an untrustworthy or bad or character or antagonist for some reason, because she outright lied to Alicent, and Alicent believed her, so she outright deceived her. But I don't know, I feel like it's kind of justified, because that kind of shit's actually none of their damn business. And it does feed to this double standard, which was talked about in this episode, where Rhaenyra even says this to Viserys when he confronts her, as being like, well, if I was a man, I could go out and bastard all these kids, no one would give a shit. And he's like, yeah, but you're not. So it points out this double standard. So I kind of don't mind the fact that she lied to Alicent. I don't know.
Yeah.
To me, it's not besmirching her character.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Alicent. It's none of your goddamn business anyway. I agree with you. But I found their relationship interesting in this episode. I think we're seeing it evolve again, because we skipped the scene earlier where they kind of were holding hands a little bit. It seems like, they still really like each other, and they could maybe rekindle their friendship. But I think this scene shows that Alicent still trusts Rhaenyra. So, and if in the future she finds out that Rhaenyra didn't tell a total truth, and she learns that she can't trust Rhaenyra, that could be trouble for their relationship. So, I find it really interesting what they're doing with these characters and the kind of relationship that they have. Last week they were just kind of, as you said, angsty teenager, and she just had that. But so this week I found their relationship a little more interesting, and I'm definitely going to be watching it moving forward.
Yeah, it was interesting that they were still friends in this episode because last
Yeah,
episode they portrayed them kind of at odds because
yeah,
she married her dad, but now there's like one scene I kind of glossed over was Viserys having sex with Alicent and how that was intercut between the other sex scenes to sort of show how it was like a chore and it was completely joyless and loveless. Um, and the it was intercut between all the people in the brothel having that huge orgy and they were all having fun, and Rhaenyra and Kristen Cole who were also like very passionate, and they juxtaposed that with Viserys and Allison who was just tired and wanted to go to bed, but she was commanded by her king.
yeah.
And so that does portray the kind of, it shows Allison is kind of is kind of a victim who's kind of it's trapped in a situation she doesn't want to be in. Maybe Rhaenyra is like trying to avoid that same situation, which is why she's hesitating on marrying someone.
Yeah, and maybe Alicent might be a little jealous. Like if she feels like if she has to suffer through that, so does Rhaenyra. Like Rhaenyra shouldn't be able to just go and have sex with whoever she wants because she doesn't.
Yeah, and maybe that fueled some of her anger towards Rhaenyra when she heard about the rumor.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So yeah. So all right. So let's talk about Viserys confronting. He confronts Rhaenyra and confronts Daemon. Now, I talked a bit about the confronting Rhaenyra bit, which was I found interesting, and is that she tells him straight out, "I didn't have sex with Daemon," and I have a feeling that. Well, we kind of can tell by the end of the episode that he doesn't believe her, and he's like, but he will say that to everyone else. Like he will deny it up and down, of course, because he still wants her to be his heir. And he makes a. I think it was when he confronted Damon, he made a threat. It's like I should shun her the same way I shunned you. But I think that was a empty threat. I don't think he would have any intention of actually. But I think it's clear that the friendship or whatever good tidings he had towards Damon were completely lost here because I think he realizes that the whole thing was an act. That the whole thing of Damon showing up and being friendly was all an act, and it was all power play to sort of rile him up and try to marry Rhaenyra, which again is not like the most crazy proposal, but it's clear that he doesn't really. It's not that he lust for Rhaenyra; it's that he lust for his throne, for the throne, and that's something Viserys kind of figured out. We talked about how he's a weak king and a bad king, but in this case, I think he's right on this regard.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, I think he, fell for the football being pulled away too many times. But I don't think he's going to fall for that again. Yeah, he's finally figured it out. Like, okay, yeah, you're just playing me. Fuck this. And he was even this time. He was even like, you can go back to your wife or don't. I don't care. Just go somewhere else. Just get out of here.
And then the whole thing with her, like confronting Rhaenyra, and he lays it out like, you're a queen, you can't just, it doesn't matter. He brings up the double standard, and he's like, well, now you have to marry. What's his name? Valerian.
Laenor Valerian.
Laenor.
Yeah, Laenor.
Laenor
or Laenor. Yeah. I think Laenor. So.
Yeah. So yes, and you have to marry him now. And she's like, all right, fine, I'll do that, but you gotta get rid of that Otto guy. Like he's bad news. And the funny thing about this is, and it seems like he was starting to come to this conclusion anyway, because one of the interesting things when he had that confrontation with Otto was that he pointed out that, oh, I see now that you were pushing your daughter on me to try to manipulate your way into the throne, which was exactly 100% correct. He is absolutely correct in that. But I also feel like Rhaenyra sort of like, made that deal. Okay, I'll marry this dude, but you gotta get rid of Otto Hightower. Was kind of now she's the one who's manipulating Viserys. Like Viserys is like, oh god, was that Secretary General dude from The Expanse, where he's a windbag. He doesn't have any sort of agency of his own. He just listens to his counselors, and for the longest time that was Otto Hightower. But now it seems like that was Rhaenyra who was like manipulating him into doing this.
Yeah, but she's not wrong. I mean, yeah, but he's right to do what he did. So she is manipulating him to an extent, but I think she's not wrong. And I think that's just Super Sarah says he's just going to be manipulated by somebody.
Yeah, and I think so. Yeah, we can go ahead and roll this into the whole thing where he actually, kicks Otto Hightower out, removes him for being hand of the king. He's like, he's like, you serve the kingdom well. You're a great servant, but I can't trust you anymore. So fuck off. Which, I think he's completely correct. Now I have heard different takes on this. I heard that he's making a mistake here, and that Otto Hightower is correct in saying that a queen will never be accepted by the realm, and that he's kind of, some people liken him to like the Varys character, where he just wants to do what's best. He wants to prevent war, which is, as we know, read the book, that's what's going to happen. So he's trying to prevent a war. He knows what's best, and he's Sorrento Gillis Brentonburg. Yes, that was the Secretary General from The Expanse. So they're liking him to the Varys character, where he's just trying to do what's best, which kind of, but also he fucking was like, oh, why don't you go comfort your king in this dark hour, and why don't you wear your mother's dress? He's a manipulative son of a bitch who has his own ambitions as well. So I don't really give him as much as a pass as other people are saying.
Well, also, all of this happened because he's the one who said, oh, let's talk about your heir. Back in episode 1, because it was assumed, and then I think it was Sea Snake or someone in the room said he already has an heir. It's Daemon. So I think there was no need to talk about the heir, because it would have just been assumed it was Daemon, regardless of whatever you want to say about Daemon. I think he still would have just been assumed to be the heir, and then when Aegon was born, he would then be the heir, and Rhaenyra would have never even been considered of the heir, because it was just flat out been Daemon if Otto didn't have it out for Daemon. Like, oh no, we can't have him be the heir. So I think he opened the door for all of this. So I don't give him any pass for preventing any war, because the war wouldn't have happened if he didn't hate Daemon so much, because it would have just been Daemon. And then it would have been Aegon, and Rhaenyra would have never been in the picture. That's what I
agree. I don't really agree with this whole Varys take, because I think it's not so much as wanting what's best for the realm as wanting what's best for his own damn family. Yeah. Because I think his plan, I think he had the plan's emotions. His suggesting Rhaenyra as the heir was like, because she's a woman, he knew it would only be temporary, and so he'd get his daughter in to marry the king, and so they would have a son, and so his grandson would become heir. I think that was his plan all along.
Yeah,
I don't think he had it in for the. I don't know.
Yeah, and I really like that Viserys brought up his father, because this is the first time it's been mentioned in the show. I wasn't sure if this was show canon, but so Viserys is the former king Jaehaerys' grandson. His father, Baelor, was the second son of Jaehaerys, but since the first son had already died, Baelor was in line to be king, and then he became hand of the king. And then 5 days after he became hand of the king, as he mentions in this episode, he has this hunting accident and he dies, and then Otto becomes hand of the king, and he's like, yeah, that worked out well for you, huh? I mean, he doesn't like flat out accuse him of murdering his father, but it's kind of like implied that I am not convinced that you didn't murder my father necessarily, because it did work out kind of well for you. Like you, so I found that really interesting. And now I don't think that the show will ever confirm whether he murdered his father or not.
Yeah,
The book doesn't. I don't believe
yeah.
whether it's just kind of left ambiguous. But I like that he kind of brought in the history a little bit. That you've been doing this, you've been doing fishy stuff for a long time here, so it's not just something that's new. Things just kind of seem to work out for you.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Viserys has finally become wise to auto hide, and he has been doing sneaky shit. Like when he, in the previous episode, when he went and was like, "Oh, Damon was seen at this, whatever it was that the shit was doing," and then in this episode where he's like, "Oh, we seen Rhaenyra, your daughter," and I think that's when because he's a bit more protective of his daughter and maybe just had years to think about it in hindsight, it kind of clicked like, you're just trying to fucking manipulate me.
Yeah. Now, but I will say this: there is an argument for him not outing Otto Hightower, and I think if he was a little bit better at playing the Game of Thrones, that he might follow the old axiom: keep your friends close and keep your enemies closer, and just kind of go along, just kind of egg Otto along, but keep him close to where he can keep an eye on him, because there's a real potential now that Otto can be even more dangerous to him now that he's been ousted. And that's also going to create this rift potentially between him and Alicent, and that's what I was talking about earlier. That I'm curious to see how that affects their relationship. She'll be like, "Well, you kicked out my dad." Like, I think that there's an argument to be made that it would have been wiser, even though he is on to Otto, just still keeping him in the fold so that he can keep an eye on him and let him believe that he is still succeeding and manipulating him when he's not. But Viserys is not, I don't think, is capable of playing the game at that level.
I do believe, though, that Viserys wouldn't remove them as Hand the King if it wasn't for Rhaenyra. I think her suggestion, it was more of a demand, really, than a suggestion. And I think that he already didn't trust him, but I don't think he would go as far as to remove him from Hand if it wasn't for Rhaenyra. So I kind of see it as like Rhaenyra's sort of bad decision.
Yeah. But I also think if Viserys was any good at this, that he would say no. If he was like Littlefinger savvy, or Varys savvy, or Tywin Lannister savvy, he would be like, no, you shut up. That's not what I'm going to do, because he would know the way to play the game. But he doesn't. So he's very, and it goes back to what you said about Rhaenyra manipulating him. He was definitely manipulated by Rhaenyra, for sure.
Yes, no, definitely, I think that's, and so so he's like Sorrento Gillis. He's a windbag. He just does what, and this time he's just listening to Rhaenyra instead of Otto Hightower. So he's still going to be being manipulated. So he's still not a good king. But that I think was very powerful. But I don't know. I mean, knowing that he's not the Littlefinger type, I do think maybe this getting rid of him was the best course of action. I don't know.
Yeah, I think he might come back to bite him there. Ramona Floyd says, "I didn't think Alicent cared about her dad in that way when Lycan's gone." I think that her dad knows how to manipulate her. We did see a little scene in the trailer for next week where I think he's going to continue to manipulate her, and so that he's going to end up turning her against Viserys is what I think may happen. But we'll see.
Also, want to say hello to Fiona in the chat, saying hello. Always enjoyed our videos and really enjoying House of the Dragon. Well, it's great to see you. Glad you're back. I noticed some people returning from the Game of Thrones days.
Yeah, it's good to see some of the old school Game of Thrones people.
All right, so let's talk. I call it penny royalty. Because I remember there was a Nirvana song about the penny royalty and how they drink it as a way of having a morning after pill, and that's kind of, I started singing that song as soon as I saw this this scene here where the maester comes in and it's like, and I thought it was interesting because when I first was watching this scene I thought, oh, she asked for this, she knows what it is, but she's like, what brew? What the hell is this stuff? It was like, oh, it's a tea. It's there to get rid of unwanted mistakes. and your father ordered this. So it's very clear that he doesn't fucking believe her. That she's still a virgin, which he's correct that she's not still a virgin, but it's not Damon, of course. And
Yeah.
so
And by her drinking that, it will be her confessing that she, needs it. So I wonder if he's going to try, have the maester come and take the empty cup. Aha! You drink it.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't think about that.
Because she could not drink it, but then that, leaves open the possibility of having Kristen's kid.
Yeah, I don't know. The scene cut, but I kind of assumed that she drank it.
Yeah, she kind of has to. But what I'm wondering is if Viserys is going to be tracking that, whether the cup has been drinking out. Aha! You confess.
I did not think about that. That's actually.
I don't think it's anything we'll see on screen. Right?
Yeah, but I don't know. He kind of commanded her to drink it.
So, yeah.
But that was kind of just his way of flat out saying to her, "I know you're lying."
Yeah.
Which I thought was a really powerful way to end the episode.
Which technically she wasn't lying to him, because to him she said, "I didn't have sex with Damon," and that's the truth.
Yeah, but she was lying and saying she didn't have sex at all. But.
Yeah, she was lying about that.
Ramona Floyd says he will be checking her sheets for her Crimson Wave. Remember that from Sansa from Game of Thrones days.
Yeah.
But she's 18 by now, so
yeah,
past that.
Yeah.
But yeah, but now we're all set for the marriage to Laenor.
Laenor Valerian.
Yeah, which we've only seen briefly, a little briefly of him. We know he has a dragon, but I have a feeling, not getting too much into spoilers, but looking at the trailer for next week's episode, that Rhaenys and what's his name, Corlys?
Yeah, Corlys, or you can just call him the sea snake. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a feeling maybe they're not going to be completely on board with this idea to begin with, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Corlys is going to try to milk it a little more. You're coming back to me now? So then he's going to try to milk some more out of it, because he'll see that as, Viserys needs me, and so I think we may see a little of that going on, but we'll see.
Yeah, no, definitely. Brittenberg saying, "I'm sure they're going to have a very happy marriage." Yep, absolutely correct. And that reminds me of a joke I was going to make at the end of the first episode. I forgot to make it, but at the end of the first episode, when Rhaenyra was crowned the heir or whatever, and all these lords were coming baking down, I was like, so I'm sure her reign's going to be perfectly great, and everyone's going to live happy ever after, and she's going to be this beautiful queen, and it's going to be this picturesque storybook, because that's how Game of Thrones is.
That's how this Game of Thrones works. Yeah.
Well, anyway, so any final thoughts on the
episode? There was something I wanted to bring up you skipped over.
Go ahead. Yeah.
We gotta bring up the ice and fire of it all again, and the prince was promised. Yeah, I don't know. Since the first episode, apparently George R. R. Martin has said that this is from the books. Like, it just hasn't been revealed in the Song of Ice and Fire yet, but this is something that he had in mind.
Okay.
But I don't know. It still makes me feel like, who's the Prince of Promise? Bran? I mean, what was it supposed to be? Jon Snow, but did his being the son of what's his face? Rhaegar ends up meaning nothing in the show. So I
watched a video where someone suggested Arya was the Prince that was promised.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've been seeing that theory for a while too.
She's not Targaryen though.
Yeah, so it doesn't make any sense. So this is the fact that, I mean, I'm sure George R. R. Martin did have this implanted in the book, and maybe he will do a better job of following through with it if he ever were to finish the books, which I'm not convinced he will. Maybe he would do a better job, but since the show screwed that up so much, I don't know that you're gonna keep bringing it up. But I will say one thing. I remember when we talked about this in the first episode. I think we were talking about how I think Darren brought up. Well, how come Daenerys doesn't know about it? I think that's this secret dies with Rhaenyra. Like I don't think anyone beyond Rhaenyra is going to know about this. So, and I think this is Viserys's mistake.
Maybe, but I think possibly it could have went beyond Rhaenyra and just died with the Mad King.
Yeah, or it could have died with Rhaegar.
Rhaegar,
he was the original heir.
Yeah.
But the more I think about it, I think that it dies with Rhaenyra. Like I don't know that Rhaenyra will pass it on to anybody, but I don't know. It definitely doesn't make it to Daenerys. I think it makes sense that it wouldn't make it to Daenerys because she was a baby.
Oh yeah, definitely not. Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. Yeah, she was a baby, and Viserys, her brother, was like a little kid. Like they wouldn't know about it.
Brandon says, no, Bran was the prince who was elected.
Because who has a better story than Bran? God damn it. This is why I don't like being reminded of season 8. That's like, yeah, so I don't care if this is what George had planned all along or if it was part of the book, because as you said, George probably has a much better plan for what happened in the book since this is a show. But yeah, so I was kind of like, when they brought this up, I was like, oh, jeez. I just want them to drop it. Like, I've heard people speculating, oh, what does this mean? Are they going to follow up? Like, how could they follow up in the storyline in any meaningful way? It's just going to be a thing. If the only way they could really follow up is, as you say, if they make a point of it that this dies, that it was something that was passed on throughout this line, but it dies with Rhaenyra.
Yeah, which might be interesting, but I don't know.
But it was interesting because I was watching this video where they were like fan questions to George R. R. Martin, and someone asked, like, because they brought up Fire and Blood and how there was like 2 different accounts so there's no like, set in stone history of what specifically happened, and he purposely wrote it that way and he was talking about how he thought it'd be fun to play with history because a lot of history is like that where you don't really know what actually happened. And so they asked, well, is this show House of the Dragon, is that the way it actually happened? Because here they can't really be ambiguous the way that the book was, and they had to outright show something. And he had a very sort of evasive answer, being like, well, it's just one interpretation. It's like, oh, he said that same shit about how many children does Scarlett O'Hara have. He always says that shit. So basically saying it doesn't matter. But it is interesting. The show is going to have to pick a path. Which is how I interpreted the whole thing with Kristen Cole, is that they picked the path, and the path was they did have a fling.
Yeah, and they're going to continue to do that, and I find that very interesting.
All right, so anything else? Are you ready to call this a stream?
We can call this a stream and get out of here.
All right, so thanks to everyone for joining in the chat. Fiona, good to see you again. Brittenberg, Brandon, always good. Ramona Floyd, thanks for stopping by, even though I know Darren wasn't here tonight. But hopefully he shall return next week, and so shall we. So anyway, yeah, and of course, big thanks to Alyssa for joining. Alyssa, if you want to give a shout out, so what you're up to and where people can find you.
You can find me on Alyssa Jean Reviews. I'm mainly doing Star Trek Lower Decks reviews and Star Trek Top 10s. This month I'm doing the best and worst of Star Trek time travel episodes. I'm doing some videos about my transition. And then I will be doing my mid-season review for House of the Dragon, where I'll also do predictions. That'll be next week after episode 5. So I'm excited about that, to get back to my roots and do some predictions again for a Game of Thrones property. So that's coming up the week after episode 5. So please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you there.
Cool. And if you're finding me for the first time, my name is Mark. My channel is Enchantment of Eternity. I will be over on Darren's channel Hopefully, he's be feeling better by then. Thursday night to talk about She-Hulk. And of course, as I said, we'll be back next week for the next episode of House of Dragon. In the meantime, you can check out my channel as I am also covering Lord of the Rings of Power, and Star Trek Lower Decks, and lots of other random Star Trek videos and other stuff and whatnot. Here's and there's. Anyway, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you all next time as soon as my mouse starts working. See ya.